Hello, everyone. I hope you're all staying well and staying at home. Thank you all for your participation with our last interview with Dr. Julia Getzelman of Getwell Pediatrics. We're fortunate enough to have another opportunity to speak with her today, mainly to debunk some of the rumors and myths surrounding COVID-19. So we've been hearing a lot of, hearsays and rumors from both the news and, going around social media. So we'll like to ask Dr. G, her take on these myths and hopefully be able to debunk most, if not all of them for us today. Thank you, Dr. G, for being with us today. How are you?
My pleasure, Pauline. Thanks for having me back. It was an opportunity to get out of my pajamas. And I want to give a warm hello to everyone who's watching or who will watch, and just, really tell you to pat yourselves on the back because we're doing a fantastic job of socially distancing in the Bay Area, and we're an example for the rest of the country. And it is not time to relax on this social distancing and voluntary isolation. We really need to hunker down, and it's unfortunately just kind of the beginning of all of this, but it's so important and it's working. Maybe later, Pauline, you could share the newsletter that went out yesterday to my practice, basically showing that we are flattening the curve. And that's so important because our healthcare resources are, potentially going to be stressed, and we don't want that. And we can better manage the infections and the people that get seriously ill if we become infected at a slower pace. So keep on keeping on, moms and dads out there. It's really, really important. I realize it's tough to be home with your kids. Having to be mom, teacher, employee, but it's so important. So I really, big congratulations, big thanks to everybody, and keep it up.
Keep it up, everybody. Okay, Dr. G, we have 10 myths that we put together.
Fabulous.
And for you to kind of speak to a little bit. So I'm just going to share my screen right now so that you all can read along and listen to what Dr. G has to say about it, okay? Give me a second here. All right, COVID-19 myth number 1. It's okay for me to take my child to play dates at their friend's house because I know the family well and they're not sick. And I don't need to obey the shelter in order. There are only a few cases in my county.
Okay, so it is not okay for parents to take their child or children for play dates at friends' homes, whether you know the family or not. And the reason for that is that we know that many children actually carry the virus but are asymptomatic. So you could think this family is well, and they're not. They might be in the asymptomatic incubation phase, or they could be in the pre-symptomatic phase and about to get sick, but still able to infect you and your children. Or the opposite could be true as well, that you could actually think that you're healthy and not bringing anything to the family next door for a play date, and you're actually infecting and contaminating their whole home. So, as hard as tough and challenging as this situation is, we just got to hang tough and hang tight. So you do need to obey the shelter at home order, whether or not there are hundreds or thousands of cases in your county or just a few, because the fact is that the numbers are not representative because of the lack of adequate testing capacity. Right. So again, just Tell yourself that you're behaving for the greater good, that you are protecting the vulnerable around you, and, just stay tight and do your best at home.
Myth number 2. I am a part of a high-risk group, so I shouldn't go outside at all because the virus can be airborne for hours, even if I maintain social distancing. And I shouldn't exercise outside on the streets because I will breathe deeply and potentially suck the virus in or spread the virus.
So if you are part of a high-risk group, there's no reason that you can't go outside. Particularly if there's a safe place for you, like a backyard or a balcony, it probably would make sense to actually breathe some fresh air. And in truth, the virus cannot be maintained in the air for hours. And we'll, I think, talk about that a little bit more later. But there was one experiment in a lab where they sprayed the virus into the air, and it hung out for a prolonged period. But this was an artificial circumstance, and there's very little evidence at this point that the virus can, I guess one way to think about it is the virus doesn't have wings.
Right.
So it's a very low risk situation to be outside, in your own yard or on your balcony, or frankly, if you want to take a walk around the block and you can socially distance 6 feet or more, that probably has some benefit. In terms of exercising, it is one of the exceptions that is allowed for leaving the home, and you will not suck the virus in based on what I've just said. And my guess is you're probably not going outside to exercise if you are sick. You could be pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic and going out to exercise and still feeling okay, but presumably you're going to be complying with the 6 feet of social distancing, and so shouldn't be a risk for anybody else the farther you are from others.
Right. So you can still get out there and enjoy the sunshine as long as you adhere to the 6 feet rule.
Correct.
Myth number 3. Takeout and or food delivery is safe as the risk of transmission is minimal.
So, based on what we know now, the risk of being infected via eating something is very low, or, minuscule. The greatest risk for transmission is contaminated hands that then are used to rub eyes, or, rub or pick noses, or infect the mucous membranes of our mouths if we have our hands in our mouths, which children do a lot. So there is a way to have food delivered or get takeout. Most of the restaurants that are doing delivery or takeout at this point are complying with stringent hygiene standards. They understand the risks. There are ways of safeguarding against the virus being transferred to plastic containers or glass or metal paper. And we'll talk about how long the virus lives on those surfaces, I think, in a little bit. So we can probably address that in one of the myths to come, Pauline.
Great. Myth number 4.
Here we go.
COVID-19 can survive on plastic for 72 hours, metal for 48 hours, cardboard for 48 hours, various hours on soft fabrics and carpets, and can remain airborne for several hours in the air.
Okay, so we just talked about the fact that the one study that suggested that the virus hangs out in the air probably, doesn't represent real life. So if you're not in the presence of somebody who's actively coughing or sneezing, You're not going to, walk outside and catch COVID. Again, the virus doesn't have wings. In terms of how long it lasts on surfaces, so it does seem to last longest on plastic and some metals, upwards of 3 days.
Okay.
Copper only for a few hours. So there are some variations in which metal we're talking about, but I would say in general, if you're, talking about metal soda cans or canned food, we're talking about probably, 2 to 3 days. Cardboard is 24 hours, and it probably lasts about 24 hours or has the potential to last 24 hours on clothing.
Okay.
So, if somebody has to go out and their clothing is in contact with a surface in public, probably either washing that garment or taking it off and hanging it somewhere and not putting it back on for a couple days makes good sense.
Okay. Number 5, if you catch COVID-19, you will not develop immunity. Reinfection is possible.
So it's really too early to know how immunity is going to develop and whether it's long lasting. To the best, of those who are in a position to know, to their knowledge, we probably will have some immunity, and it might be long lasting. It's just that it's unclear. So, I think that's the best that I can say at this point based on what we know.
Right. So even if you have recovered, fully recovered from having COVID-19, you still need to practice good hygiene and social distancing.
Oh, absolutely. No question.
Myth number 6, ibuprofen makes COVID-19 symptoms worse.
Right. So there was an initial study or recommendation that came out by the World Health Organization alerting the public to the dangers of ibuprofen use during COVID infection. And they subsequently quickly retracted that statement. And again, there isn't really enough information at this point to make that, recommendation or caveat. I think that what I'd like to make clear is that most fevers in children that are caused by COVID or any other virus don't have to be treated in and of themselves. So fever is the body's way of responding to and mounting a response to an infection that it's trying to fight.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of mythology around and fear around fever. In pediatrics, we call it fever phobia. So that there's kind of this nebulous, idea that fever can cause brain damage, that it's bad for children to have fevers, that we need to treat every fever. And it's not true. So ibuprofen probably is safe to use to treat a fever during a COVID-19 infection. Fortunately, most children are not symptomatic or are, more mildly symptomatic. And so probably the question of what to use to control the fever, won't even arise. But what I tell parents is, treat discomfort, treat misery.
Right.
And do it sparingly, because no medication is without risks, and essentially we don't want to suppress the body's fight, or immune response. So,
thank you. Myth number 7, 6% of children under the age of 18 who contracts COVID-19 will develop severe symptoms.
So this is absolutely untrue. It turns out that kids according to data from China, kids 0 to 19 years of age make up about 2% of all cases of COVID.
Okay.
And of that approximately 2%, 6% of those have severe symptoms. So 6% times 2% is 0.12% of all cases of COVID are children with severe symptoms. But the data are still very reassuring in terms of, children's risk for severe illness and death. And even among a small study of babies who were hospitalized with severe illness, none of them died. So this is, super reassuring for parents, but it's not a reason to get lax about really isolating.
Right. So
you're protecting the vulnerable by keeping your kids at home, and those include your parents, your children's grandparents, aunts and uncles, the people that live down the block who are over 60, etc.
Right. Myth number 8. Young children, infants and toddlers in particular, are more at risk of serious illness from contracting COVID-19 than older children.
No, this is not true. Again, the statistics out of China looking at kids 0 to 19 are actually exceedingly reassuring. So this doesn't seem to be true, thank goodness. So we don't know why, but as I think I said last time, I'll take it, as I'm sure will most of all the parents
yes.
who are watching.
We'll take it. We'll take it. Myth number 9. People younger than 30 are 84% less likely to have symptomatic infection than those 30 to 59 years old, while those older than 59 years old are 2 times more likely to have a symptomatic infection. Children, however, are more likely to have a symptomatic infection than those 20 to 29 years old.
So, following up from the last question, children are far less likely to be symptomatic than those over 20. So when I say children, I mean, 0 to 19. And then something begins to happen in our 20s that allows the virus in some cases to take hold and to cause lower respiratory illness, i.e. pneumonia. And people in their 20s and 30s and 40s are not immune to having, severe illness and need for hospitalization. However, it is still bearing out that the majority of fatalities are happening in people over 60. So let's see, what was the statistic that I wanted? So 20% of those infected between 20 and 44 need hospitalization.
Wow.
53% of those over 65 years of age are admitted to need to be admitted to the intensive care unit, and that age group above 65 years of age, 80%, those account for 80% of deaths.
Right. Wow.
So
still good news for children.
Yes.
Okay, and this is the last myth. Myth number 10. Putting things under the sun will kill any COVID-19 residue that may be on the surface.
So I think this gets to, the question about how long does the virus survive on different surfaces. And so it's not just a matter of, putting your kids' toys in the sun and, leaving them for an hour and assuming that there's no virus left on them. Leaving plastic or metals for 3 to 4 days probably means that there's no live virus left on them. So the question of putting something in the sun is, you know, pretty vague. I think it's more about the amount of time that and what the object is that is important.
Right. So don't just assume that putting it under the sun will automatically get rid of any virus on any surface, on any materials.
On any material, yeah.
Just let it sit for 3 days, and that's the safest way to go.
If you're really worried about it, let it sit for 3 to 4 days. Otherwise, you know, using a 70% alcohol solution or, you know, scrubbing with soap and water probably takes care of the virus.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Dr. G, for addressing and debunking these 10 myths surrounding COVID-19. I think a lot of questions have been cleared up. And hopefully, you know, with the promising data still in place about children, we can all breathe a little easier and, you know, have a little less anxiety as we go into our 3rd week of shelter in order. I know that schools are out for longer now than expected. I think most schools are going to be closed until at least May. So we hope that you're all hanging in there. You know, we're all with you. We're all in the same boat here. So together with our efforts, we can continue to flatten the curve and to slow and stop the spread of COVID-19. And hopefully we'll hear more promising and more good news coming up real soon from our health professionals. So thank you, Dr. G, for letting us sleep a little bit easier at night.
My pleasure. I'm happy to alleviate anxiety and pain and discomfort.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.